Welcome to This Explainer. Look, today we're diving straight into a practical guide built specifically for us educators. We're talking about making that crucial shift in our math teaching, moving away from just feeding kids procedural rules and instead building this deep, truly connected understanding in our classrooms. Because let's face it, if you want your students to actually get the math, like really understand it rather than just cramming for a Friday quiz, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's get into it. Okay, let's kick things off with a highly relatable inner conflict from educator Jane Carell. Picture this. You're suddenly faced with adding two pretty large numbers together. Do you immediately reach for a pencil and paper to stack them up in a neat, perfect column? Or do you instinctively rely on mental arithmetic? Breaking the numbers apart and shuffling them back together in your head using intuitive steps. It's a split-second decision, right? But man, it reveals a whole lot about how we fundamentally view mathematics. Jane actually asks this brilliant question about it. Is it just me, or do you experience the same? And honestly, this hits the nail on the head. It highlights this incredibly common tension we feel as teachers. We're constantly caught right in the middle. On one hand, we feel the pressure to demonstrate the strict, quote-unquote, correct calculation method. But on the other hand, we just want to look at the numbers logically and solve the problem in a way that just makes organic sense. It's the ultimate battle, really, the prescribed rule versus natural number sense. Now, for a lot of us, our own schooling was totally dominated by this older way of doing things. You know the drill. Endless practice of procedural steps and strict rule following. And sure, we could successfully apply those steps when we needed to pass a test. But it kind of left us lacking a deeper, interconnected understanding of how the math actually worked under the hood. We knew exactly what to do, absolutely, but we rarely understood why we were doing it. And honestly, that left a lot of us with this lingering anxiety anytime a problem didn't perfectly fit the mold we memorized. So, to really make sense of the pedagogical shift we're aiming for today, let's dive into Section 1, Skemp's Two Math Approaches. This framework comes from Richard Skemp, a 20th century mathematician turned psychology professor. Skemp defines this first approach as instrumental mathematics. This is your classic rote learning, entirely centered around memory, rigid rules, and ultimately just churning out the correct answers. Now, to be fair, instrumental mathematics is often way easier to pick up at first, and it's highly rewarding in the short term, right? Because it gives you those quick, correct answers. You get a rule to follow, you apply it, and boom, you get the right result. But let's look at the flip side. Skemp's second approach is relational mathematics. This is completely focused on establishing mathematical connections, building a rock-solid foundation of understanding over time, and, crucially, learning how to apply those concepts to entirely new, unseen problems. So instead of just memorizing a magic trick, relational mathematics allows concepts to become intuitive. Think about what a massive relief that is for students. It completely lifts that heavy burden of endless memorization. The knowledge actually becomes adaptable, and it's so much easier to recall because, well, it actually makes logical sense. Now, when we put these side by side, instrumental with its rules and quick fixes on one hand, and relational with its deep connections on the other, a really clear picture emerges. Look, in reality, a highly effective math lesson is probably going to use a little bit of both. But if you design a lesson relying purely on the instrumental side, you're running a massive risk. You're literally limiting a pupil's opportunity to connect mathematical concepts. They might know the rule for today's specific worksheet, for sure, but they won't have a clue how to adapt it to tomorrow's real-world problem. Okay, so the big question, how do we actually execute this shift? How do we stop just telling pupils to solve problems in one single, rigid way? Well, that brings us to Section 2, the power of the anchor task. Let's check out this snapshot from a Year 4 classroom. The lesson kicks off with an anchor task, basically an addition word problem. But here's the kicker. Instead of the teacher standing at the board showing the one true method, the task deliberately invites students to find multiple entry points based on what they already know. Just think about the strategies these kids came up with. Some are drawing number lines, others using traditional column addition, and some are partitioning and recombining the numbers. Honestly, it might feel a little messy or chaotic at first glance, but they're tackling the exact same problem from multiple angles based entirely on their own logic. And by structuring your lesson this way, you're fostering this incredible ethos of exploration and self-discovery. Because as individual pupils explain their totally varied thinking to the rest of the class, their peers sit and listen. And in that active listening, they're making their own mathematical connections. Suddenly they realize that math isn't just a single, narrow, tightrope walk through a dense forest. It's this wide-open landscape of logical solutions just waiting to be explored. The big takeaway here is glaringly obvious when we compare the old approach with the new approach. The old way, explaining one method and just practicing it until you're blue in the face, that just creates rule followers. But this new relational design, the one offering multiple entry points and building peer-to-peer connections, it does something so much more powerful. It builds authentic confidence in getting to the answer organically. Students actually learn to trust their own logic, rather than just memorizing a list of steps without ever knowing why they're doing them. Alright, theory is great and all, but how do you actually apply this directly to your own classroom practice tomorrow morning? Let's move into section 3, your relational teaching journey. So here's a highly practical, quick exercise to help guide your transition. First, just grab a piece of paper and draw a horizontal line. Put instrumental at one end, relational at the other. Now be totally honest with yourself here. Mark exactly where your current teaching sits on that continuum. Got it? Next, pinpoint a specific spot slightly further along that line that you want to travel towards. And finally, and this is absolutely crucial, don't do it alone. Pair up with a colleague to build your relational approach together. Honestly, having a sounding board makes all the difference in the world when you're trying to shift your pedagogy. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, truly vital question. Take a hard look at your own lessons right now and ask yourself, who is actually doing the thinking, the reasoning, and the connection building? Are you up at the front doing all the heavy lifting, or are you creating a dynamic experience where your learners are discovering the math for themselves? Because making that shift, that is exactly what turns a standard math class into a true journey of exploration. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and hey, happy teaching!